Welcome to FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I'm Patrick Elliott, Senior Counsel at the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
And I'm Rebecca Markert, the Legal Director here at FFRF.
And today we'll be talking about recent legal victories in two of FFRF's cases. Both cases involve limits on the ability of FFRF's members to communicate a message. The first case involves a Florida County Commission that put unconstitutional limits on invocation speakers at its meetings. The other case involved limits on a Kentucky man's right to request a personalized license plate with a non-religious message. As always, you're welcome to submit questions, which we will answer at the end of the show. Please feel free to submit them in the comments below or by emailing us at askanatheist@ffrf.org.
Before we get into the cases that Patrick mentioned, we first wanted to take a closer look at the National Prayer Breakfast and President Trump's remarks last week during that event. The first speaker is Arthur Brooks, a conservative Catholic writer and professor at Harvard, and he's quoting Jesus from Matthew 5:43.
You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of the Father in heaven. My friends, that is the theme of this breakfast today. Love your enemies. That's thinking differently.
And Arthur, I don't know if I agree with you. But I don't know if Arthur's going to like what I'm going to say. As everybody knows, my family, our great country, and your president have been put through a terrible ordeal by some very dishonest and corrupt people. They have done everything possible to destroy us, and by so doing, very badly hurt our nation. They know what they are doing is wrong, but they put themselves far ahead of our great country. I don't like people who use their faith as justification for doing what they know is wrong. Nor do I like people who say, I pray for you, when they know that that's not so.
Well, in the strange bedfellows category comes this editorial in the Washington Post calling for the end of the National Prayer Breakfast, a position that we at FFRF have long supported. But this time it comes from a remarkable source, the ultra-conservative writer Cal Thomas. He writes, Trump clearly missed a grand opportunity. It would have cost him nothing to shake Pelosi's hand. Perhaps it is time to suspend this annual event or to hold it without this president attending if he can't accept the nonpartisan theme that has been its tradition for nearly 7 decades. I'm sure we at FFRF don't have a lot in common with Cal Thomas, but in this case we are right there with him. Let's cancel the National Prayer Breakfast. This is not an event that we should be participating in. Right. So on the subject of today's show, Rebecca, we wanted to talk about two victories that we recently had. And the first is a long-running case that I know you've been involved in, and FFRF and other organizations have. And I'm wondering if you can bring us up to speed on what happened in Brevard County, Florida.
Sure. This is a case that has been going on since 2015. We sued over legislative prayer. And I'm going to back up a little bit so that I can explain a little bit of the state of the law so you understand what we were suing over. So as people may know, back in the 1980s, there was a case called Marsh v. Chambers that went up to the U.S. Supreme Court. That case held that it is okay for legislative bodies like your city council, your county board meetings, to have prayer included as part of them. But there was a little section of that case that said that they had to be non-sectarian and non-denominational. So after that case came down, there was a lot of litigation over whether you could pray to a specific deity. Then Greece versus Galloway went up to the U.S. Supreme Court. In that case, the vast majority of those prayers were to Jesus. And the plaintiffs in that case were saying that that practice, sectarian prayer before meetings, was illegal. Unfortunately, the U.S. Supreme Court said, no, that's fine. They can pray to Jesus as long as they open up the opportunity to many different people.
Right.
And they.
This was this decided around 2014?
That's
I mean, it's
right.
a very recent case.
It's a very recent case,
Right.
yes. So it was decided in 2014, and the Supreme Court said that because the town of Greece had opened up their venue to anyone who wanted to give a prayer, including an atheist, that the prayer practice was constitutional. And so that brings us to Brevard County. So in Florida, our chapter, the Central Free Thought Florida chapter, had decided that they wanted to give invocations at the Brevard County Commission meetings. So they went and they asked to do that, and Brevard said no. They said no because they didn't believe in monotheism. And so they were discriminated against and were not allowed to give the prayer. So we, along with the ACLU, national organization, and the ACLU of Florida, and Americans United for Separation of Church and State, represented our plaintiffs here in suing the county over this unconstitutional prayer practice.
Okay, and so just recently there's been some movement on this. This is why we're talking about it today, because this case has been going on for a while. Can you tell us what has happened?
So, like I said, it's been going on since 2015. It's wended its way up the courts. And last summer, we received a victory at the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, where the court said that it was discrimination, that they couldn't categorically exclude would-be prayer givers or people who wanted to give a secular invocation from that opportunity. And just last night, we reached a settlement agreement with the county, and it was unanimously approved by the county last night at a board meeting. And so now it looks like this victory is finally final.
Right, and it takes a while, but I think obviously these cases can really drag on.
Yes.
And take a while. We have the lead plaintiff in the case. David Williamson is joining us from Florida. Welcome, David.
Hi, David.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me.
And I have to start out by asking, what's the temperature there in the Orlando area?
Well, we have the air conditioning on today. That helps.
We're going to have some air conditioning this week, too.
That disturbs me because I looked, we're in Wisconsin, it's going to be, the low tomorrow is going to be negative 10 degrees. So, so I'm envious. But thank you for joining us, and congratulations to you with the recent approval of the settlement by the county commission. So I just wanted to get, what's your reaction to, this soon to be resolved case?
Yeah, it's been a long time coming, but we're happy that the commission voted 5-0. The same way they voted before, but on the other direction. And they accepted the settlement after a little bit of discussion yesterday. But assuming they do the right thing and stop discriminating, it's a win.
Yeah, and you're a co-founder of the Central Florida Free Thought community. Has this been an issue? I think that I know that your group has been involved kind of in trying to let atheists or free thinkers really be fully involved in these types of things. Can you describe kind of what the group has done on this issue and some of the other state church issues?
Sure, there's a lot there because we have a lot of material that we send your way, and we help people with questions that they have about separation of church and state over the years since we started in 2012. On this particular issue, before the Greece decision came down in 2015, we had already prepared ourselves to engage in about 20 local governments and asked to participate like this. And all but one said yes. Some of them were reluctant. It took a while. Brevard County was the only one that resisted permanently. And we had a couple of letters sent. The Anti-Defamation League sent a letter. And this all the way back in June of 2014. As you said earlier, Rebecca, the litigation began in 2015. That was July. So it's been a lot of work with this case. But at the same time this has been going on, we've done almost 90 invocations across Central Florida, including one at Florida House of Representatives, really close to 30 different invocators.
So you were saying, your audio is cutting out a little bit, but you were saying that you've delivered, was it almost 90 invocations at various government meetings, including the Florida legislature?
That's right, the Florida House.
Oh, great. That's great.
And you're not the one doing all of these. You have a bunch of people. And you and your wife have also received FFRF's Nothing Feels Like Prayer Award. Is that correct?
Right. That was an honor to receive that. And for those that are listening now that do that, that's a great trip to the conference. Expenses paid, and I would encourage you to continue to support that.
Yes, so it is an annual award that we give out for brave people who go to their county board meetings or city council meetings and deliver a secular invocation. You can submit it to us at our website, and you might be selected and win if your prayer is the best, and win a trip to FFRF's annual convention.
Right. And I wanted to ask, because you're kind of an expert on this, having delivered these invocations or been involved in this issue now for a number of years and litigating a case for 5 years as the lead plaintiff. So congratulations to you having your name. Williamson is now a reference to a case that's good on state-church separation. So that's a badge of honor for you. But what would you advise, other Florida communities or communities across the country, city councils, county commissions, what should they do with prayer, or what should their policies look like?
Right. The two things that I would say first are, one is we're not talking about school boards, just legislative meetings at counties, towns, and et cetera. You don't want to start a prayer practice, so you want to research and find out if there's prayer already happening. And you want to determine how that's happening, whether it's just through practice or policy, and ask to participate in written form. Letter is great, email is fine, keep records of all of your communication. And when you any pushback at all, I would say contact the Freedom from Religion Foundation, get assistance there, or any of the national groups that are supporting this. We've got some counsel with Americans United and ACLU, and I know that other organizations are doing this. So documenting everything, making sure you're included, and ensuring that they're following the practices that are appropriate based on their policy. And as long as the policy is discriminatory, you should be able to participate.
And that's some great advice. I think a lot of our members would really like to hear that. Along those same lines, David, you were a plaintiff for almost 5 years in a case. Do you have any advice for would-be plaintiffs? Because I imagine that during those 5 years, it was frustrating at times. And do you have any advice for people who might want to be a plaintiff in a lawsuit someday?
I think that we didn't see the resistance that particularly younger people have. We didn't go in anonymously. But I think the advice I would give is set your expectations low on the outcome. Just ensure that if it doesn't go as you like, that you can still keep your hopes up, because there's a lot more that you can do besides litigate. That is one of the few things we do. A lot of other things, including letter writing, education, and all kinds of stuff. So litigation is a very small work that we're doing together, but it's important when the facts in a case are correct. They're not always that way. So every invocation case in Florida and across the country is not going to go the same way. That's why there's only a few that are litigated. We're lucky to have the facts that really lined up for us in this case.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being, a plaintiff and being a member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And certainly, we are a resource, as you mentioned. And this was a coalition effort. We worked with Americans United for Separation of State and Church, the ACLU, another Florida free thinker organization, as well as the Central Florida Free Thought Community. So it's really been a coalition effort. And I think that maybe helped get the result in this case with a number of people working towards the same goal, to make communities inclusive. I think that, it's really the way that these cases should be handled.
Right, exactly. Well, David, we'd like you to hang around for questions later in the show. That would be wonderful. And so we want to talk about another victory in a case that Patrick and I have been working on for a while. This has really been your baby the last couple of years. So why don't you tell us about this?
Yeah, we've talked about this case on Ask an Atheist before, but it's kind of a fun case because it involves personalized license plates, or what people would call vanity plates. One of our members, Ben Hart, sued the state of Kentucky because they were rejecting his license plate, which he wanted to say, "I'm God." That's the plate that he had previously in the state of Ohio. He had for, I think, 12 years and had that on his plate without really any issues. And Kentucky wasn't going to allow it. The problem was that they had allowed all sorts of other religious messages on on license plates. So we worked in this case also in a coalition effort with the ACLU of Kentucky and sued under the free speech clause of the First Amendment, and really sought to just get him his plate. And so we won the case in November of 2019, and so the judge ruled in our favor and said this violates the free speech clause to censor, somebody's non-religious message. I'm God is the message that Ben wanted here, but other non-religious messages also would, face similar fate. And I'm happy to announce what, again, Ben had that plate in Ohio for a number of years, but he just recently was able to request and get the plate from the state of Kentucky. So we really brought the case from beginning to end there. You can see him pictured with his new Kentucky plate next to his old Ohio plate. And so, it was a big issue because the state had gone through and was censoring people's plates, some religious, some non-religious in this instance. And the decision really stands for that people can put, what they would like, their personalized message. It's not the state's message on their plates. The other good news for us and for the attorneys that put time into the case, like the ACLU of Kentucky, was that the court just recently awarded attorney's fees, which ended up being over $150,000 to litigate this case from start to finish. Just like the Brevard case, this took, I think we filed in 2016. So it's more than 4 years of litigation. And thankfully, the organizations can be compensated for the work that you put in and that I put in and that other attorneys put in because, these are civil rights cases that deserve to be compensated. And so certainly in the Brevard case, attorneys' fees are also part of the settlement agreement. And that's something that plaintiffs should be able, to recover when we pursue these claims. So I think it's certainly, it's good that we're able to recover, and it's good that the courts actually recognize that's something that the plaintiffs were entitled to.
Right. It was a great victory for us and also for the Constitution, really, in a free speech type case. I first met Ben when I first started here back in 2009, and I remember him talking to me about his plate, and it was just a funny aside when we were talking about some other state church violations that were going on in his community, and I never thought that it would become a case itself. I didn't, obviously back then didn't know that he was going to move to Kentucky and be rejected, but I'm happy for him. He's a great guy, and I'm so happy that he was able to get his plate that he loved so much.
Yeah, and what's funny about these is, this is true of all of our cases, that we usually try to resolve them without going to court. All of this could have been avoided. I personally wrote 2 or 3 letters on Ben's behalf explaining to the state why, that they would have to approve it because they had approved other religious plates. Same thing with Brevard. Our organization, other organizations tried to resolve these issues before we had to go to court. But when the government officials aren't respecting your constitutional rights, then that's the last option. And so that's why we have to pursue those cases, and ultimately attorney's fees become an issue at the very end of a case after you've already won, which is an issue in both of these recent victories, which just came up this week. Really, these are both breaking news cases.
Right, and it's really great that these are coalition efforts with these other organizations. I think these types of efforts are even more important now when we're facing a legal landscape that's not very friendly to state-church separation, and so that we're able to work with Americans United and work with the ACLU and do it so well together. That's great for our movement as a whole.
Right. And I think, do we have any questions? I don't know.
Yeah.
You're going to be the question asker
yes,
today.
I will
from anybody
take a look.
who has questions, they can comment on the Facebook page below or submit at askanatheist@ffrf.org.
Yeah. So Amy Edmonds asks, what's the longest length of time that FFRF represented or facilitated a single case?
So I can give a guess on one of ours. The better one is I know that there have been cases like the Mount Soledad Cross in California, which was not our case, which was an ACLU case, took more than 20 years.
Yes.
It may be like the longest running state church case that I can think of.
Yes, it was one of them. It kept going up and down, up and down. So yeah, I think in the end it was over 25 years. But the longest case I think that I've worked on has been about 5 years. And that's not even necessarily from the beginning of litigation to the end. I mean, sometimes you have to factor in the time that we are trying to resolve these short of going to court. So when we write a letter, when I got a cross in Santa Clara, California removed, I had first written to them in 2012. And we had protracted correspondence for a number of years before we finally had to file a lawsuit. So it was a good 6 or 7 years before we got that settled.
Yeah, and I think I may have figured out what the right answer is now. I don't. Well, we'll see. FFRF had been involved in challenging the housing allowance to ministers. And so that took a few iterations of going through courts, not in any one individual case, but I think we originally filed in 2008 or 2009 in California U.S. District Court to pursue our case. In the interim, the U.S. Supreme Court issued an unfavorable decision on who could bring a state church challenge and who would have standing. So we ended up having to voluntarily dismiss that case in California, refile it in Wisconsin, and then when it went through the Wisconsin courts, the courts basically said, oh, you don't have standing here because the Freedom from Religion Foundation hadn't designated the housing allowance for its employees. So FFRF then did that, went back to court, and only last year in 2019 did we have a resolution. So that case is about 10 to 11 years that FFRF had worked on it, and that really shows, I think, how much effort and time go into pursuing some of these claims. So 5 years isn't scary to attorneys. It's scary to the plaintiff, who wants the results, because you shouldn't have to wait to have your rights protected. But some of these cases really do take a long time.
And it is something that we bring up when we're talking to potential plaintiffs, that this is going to be a long process, and if there's an appeal, it's going to be even longer. And it's something that we really need to prepare them for, because I think a lot of people just have this idea that they all have a right to a speedy trial, and that things are going to be wrapped up pretty quickly, and that's not always the case. The converse of that, though, is we did have a case that we filed and settled within months. So sometimes it is quick, but most often it takes a number of years.
Yeah. And it's helpful to give people that expectation so that they know that justice is slow.
So this question came through Twitter. Did the Kentucky DMV try to prove that Ben Hart isn't God or something? He actually exists, unlike other gods that people claim to believe in. What was their reason for denying him the plate? If they just thought it was offensive, that seems like a slippery slope to having blasphemy laws.
Right. I think this person gets it. So I think the difficulty in having the state make a determination about something like that. If you asked Ben and he's explained this, he has put this on his plate because he says that. He says, you can't just prove I'm God. So he's making a philosophical point. He's not actually believing that he's God, but he's making a philosophical point. And I think he has the right to do that. And originally when the state of Kentucky denied it, there's various reasons that they gave, but at first they said it wasn't in good taste, and it wasn't in good taste and decency. And so we had pointed out that that can't be a standard for the state to review people's messages and decide what's in good taste or decent. We don't want the government to be making those types of decisions. And then later on, they cited to a rule that said that you can't have a plate that has anything that's religious or anti-religious. And part of the problem with that is we don't think the state should be doing that either. We actually think the state should allow religious personalized plates if people want them. And having the state, go down that road was a problem because they were allowing all these plates that said pray or God, but not his plate that they deemed to be religiously offensive. So I think it is a very fine line between blasphemy and offense when it comes to religious topics. So I agree with the Twitter user there.
And when I first met Ben, he did tell me that his wife does think he's God. So it shows a little bit of his personality there. Another question, Monica asks, and this is actually a question for David, if we can get him back. Where can people find a list of secular invocations? Does that exist?
David is not God. We can't hear him yet. So hold on a moment. David, we're going to try to get audio back for you.
Apologies.
There we go. All right, now we can hear you.
I had the conference call mute going. The source for this information is actually our website. We have captured all of our invocations, including video, transcripts, and even duration, so you know how long these are. And that's at cflfreethought.org.
Can you just repeat that again? You cut out a little bit.
Yep, sorry, that is cflfreethought.org is the website.
All right.
And you can search Central Florida Free Thought Community, and you'll find it. It's actually a really fancy website. I was looking at it today. They did a really good job with their just localized website.
And since the Greece decision came down, and there's been these great efforts to have secular invocations, there's a lot of really good ones that are out there that have been given not only in Florida but all across the country. And we have some of them up also on our YouTube channel, so people can get inspired that way.
I think if you watch any of the invocations that David has given, or other members of that chapter or others, they're usually, what's fun about them is that they're usually inspirational and they're positive messages. And I think a lot of people think, how could somebody non-religious deliver an invocation, and the city council chambers will tumble and fall because if we do this, something bad's going to happen. Or they're really, nothing bad happens. It's just a message to start the meeting like any other message. It's just not a religious message. So I think if people are looking for examples, certainly you can find some examples that David's done or others, but I liked that they weren't targeting religious people for ridicule. They were, for the most part, just trying to create a positive message.
Right. One of my favorite was in the Arizona State House, where he said, I don't want you to bow your heads. I want you to look at each other and remember why we're here, and just like revel in that moment that we've been given great responsibility. And I think that's wonderful. So finally today, we have one last head scratcher. The Justice Department hands out monetary grants to various groups to fund anti-human trafficking activities. This is a new news piece that we just found out about this morning. Often these grants go to explicitly religious organizations like Catholic Charities. But this year, that organization and others have had their grants denied in favor, and I promise I'm not making this up, in favor of a group called Hookers for Jesus. When asked to defend the current antics of the Justice Department, Attorney General Bill Barr replied, quote, in his State of the Union, President Trump delivered a message of genuine optimism filled with unapologetic faith in God and in American greatness and in the common virtues of the American people: altruism, industriousness, self-reliance, and generosity. So FFRF's Andrew Seidel is contacting the Justice Department about Hookers for Jesus, and FFRF is releasing a statement about this new development today. So please go to our website later and ffrf.org and check it out.
And well, that's it for all of us today. As always, visit our website at ffrf.org for all sorts of information on our activities, or to join us in the important work we do to keep state and church separate. We'd love to have you as a member. So join us next week for FFRF's Ask an Atheist on Wednesday at noon Central Time. Happy Charles Darwin's birthday today, and thanks for watching.